Hey guys, it's Russ with HealthForward Online, and I'm back here again at athletic camps for another lecture. So let's go on in and talk to Bruce about what's going to be on tap for tonight. All right, so we're here with Bruce Hendler. He's the owner of Athletic Camps. So what's the lecture on tonight?
Lecture number 4 out of 5 is being called Athlete versus Competitor.
Okay.
It's about becoming a better competitor in the unique sport of bike racing. A lot of programs focus on the physical side. We're going to talk a little bit more about what it takes to win bike races, the mental side of the sport, and the dedication that it takes and the different types of approaches it takes to become a better bike racer.
All right, great, thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, first thing I want to talk about is bike racing is a bit different than most sports, okay? The first thing that we always talk about at our race school is training hard doesn't give us the right to win bike races. I know that sounds almost negative, but it's true. I hear so many athletes say they train so hard, they're on these training programs, and they go to the bike races, it just does not happen for them. And the reason being is bike racing is a very, very unique type of sport. One, it's teams working for the glorification of an individual. I don't know any other sport that does that. Maybe speed skating in the streets do the same type of thing, but everything that we know is basically teams, right? NBA basketball, soccer, anything, it's teams. Cycling is completely different. They're working for the glorification of one person, so that's very unique in itself. And sometimes very difficult to swallow for the domestiques or the other riders who aren't necessarily getting the glory. One thing that's different is, are there any runners here tonight that can be? Yeah, Bruce, yeah, of course. How about cyclists that were runners and now cycling? Okay, so there's a good amount. Running versus bike racing. The reason I wanted to talk about this is running is unique in that when you train, for the most part, let's just say you're training for a marathon, you pretty much know going into the marathon what to expect because of the training, correct? I mean, if you're training for a 3-hour marathon, for the California International Marathon, you're not going to go do 2:10. You're probably, if everything goes according to plan, you're probably not going to go 4:15 or 4:30, at least you don't hope, right? The other thing that makes running very unique is it's very separated by event, especially at the higher level. In other words, the marathons, who are really good at the Kenyans, the Ethiopians, right? 5'2", 115 pounds. Who are good on the sprints, the 100 meters, the 200 guys, the more bulkier guys, right? The guys that are stronger, they both have very low body fat, but their body types are completely different. You will never see the world record in the marathon, the guy compete against Maurice Green, who was one of the great sprinters in ISIS. Never. They'll never line up on the line together. Bike racing is different, right? In road cycling, even in something like the Tour de France, you'll have the sprinters and the climbers lining up on the start line together. So it's a little bit different from that perspective. So the event types are different, and the training prep is completely different. The training prep, what I'm talking about, is going back to the original one about the training hard. It's only a prerequisite for doing well in bike races, okay? It's not easy to win bike races and can be one of the most frustrating things on earth. I mean, you could go through your whole career and maybe win 1 race or 2 races. I mean, it reminds me, I use golfing a lot as an analogy. It reminds me of some of these golfers, these pro golfers that are out on the PGA Tour for 15 years or more. They're always there. How many tournaments do they win? 2? I mean, that takes a lot of dedication to be able to do something like that, and cycling is the same way. Why is it different? No timeouts, no stoppages for injuries, no quarters or half times. Once the gun goes, right, it starts. You can't call timeout and talk to your team director. It's got to be done on the road, where, of course, all these other sports are, they stop. I mean, how long does it take for the last 2 minutes of an NBA game? 30 minutes? Because of timeouts, TV timeouts, fouls, everything, right? I mean, these guys are constantly regrouping and talking about what they need to do. Cycling, you can't do that. It's very frustrating, but it's bike racing. Of course, I'm talking specifically about mass group starting races, correct? 99%, I just pulled that out of a hat, there's no study, but 99% of what happens is out of your control. If you're in a group, you can ask someone like Mike. I'll never forget one comment he made once. He was in a field of 250 over in Europe and took you, 30 minutes to get to the front and 10 seconds to get to the back. I mean, everything is out of your control. You have no idea what's happening right across the way where there could be a swarm of 50 or 60 riders moving up the right-hand side. It's brutal. You can only really control yourself and what's going on, or your team, or in your area. Correct? Tactics and strategies are always dynamic, always changing. Always changing. So obviously that requires communication. But you always have to, hey, how many times does a team get together, or an individual and a group of friends get together at the beginning of a bike race, have a plan, and within 30 minutes in the race, forget it, it's out. You have to be able to change on the fly. Okay, basic definitions about the whole basis for tonight's discussion about athletes versus competitors. When we associate an athlete, I took this out of Webster's, a person possessing the natural acquired traits such as strength, agility, and endurance that are necessary for physical exercise or sport, especially those performed in competitive context. How often do you hear the saying, he or she is just so strong? Like you go on a group ride, oh, he's so strong, right? Or he or she is such a natural athlete. You just hear that. My thing that always pops into my head is, assuming they're bike racers, do they win bike races? Just because you're strong, just because you're a good athlete, again, doesn't necessarily make you a great competitor, correct? And a competitor is one who strives against one another to attain a goal such an advantage or a victory. So simple definitions, but obviously what we're talking about tonight, trying to understand the difference and becoming a better competitor. Okay, athlete characteristics. The majority of bike racers focus solely on physical training programs, which, don't get me wrong, is very important. So an athlete comes into my office, and we start talking about coaching. And one of the first things I always ask them is, what do you want out of your coach? Right? Simple question. Inevitably, 95% of the time, I want a training program, I want workouts. Right? That's pretty much what they ask for. That's the norm. They're very focused on the physical side. It's very important, but it dominates their programs, their overall programs. There are a lot of different programs. I just so happen to think ours is the best. But there are a lot of different programs, point A to point B, similar to, there's no secrets out there, right? A good coach, there's no magic workout from one coach to the other. We're all dealing with the aerobic system, the anaerobic system. Bike racing is pretty much the same everywhere you go. So there's just a lot of different ways from getting from point A to point B. An immense amount of work and sacrifice from a physical standpoint, which takes years to develop, but it does come. We're talking about, when we're talking about developing you as an athlete, the physical side, we're talking about changing blood, muscle, lung capacity, and gas exchanges, the heart. These things do not happen overnight. So it takes a lot of patience, but it does come. For some people, it takes longer. For other people, it's shorter. You can never compare yourself to somebody else. I could give two identical twins, so to speak, the same training program, and one may progress at a faster rate than the other. The key point to understand here is that from a physical standpoint, it does improve. And there's a couple things. One thing we're definitely seeing a lot of more recently, obviously, is masters racing. A lot of people in their 30s and their 40s and their 50s starting to get into bike racing. It never happened 20 years ago. Once you hit 30, it was over. And now, of course, masters racing almost dominates what goes out in the U.S. It's unbelievable. And I have seen firsthand how masters athletes can improve dramatically. It's unbelievable. Most of the studies done that we read are done with younger athletes, but there are more, like Maria's study with masters athletes, that are starting to come out more. Because masters athletes can improve. question that's always asked about the athlete or the physical side is how fit can I get? Well, the initial answer is I have no idea. I mean, if I could tell you exactly how good you could be, I would be seeing a crystal ball. I can't tell you. But most of our aerobic games are limited to our environment, not our physiology. You know, in other words, even as a master starting out at 35 or 45, it's, you know, you have a family, a job, the people you ride with, versus someone who's younger, right, and starting at the ladder down at age 23, 24, has a whole career ahead of them, right? And they're limitless in what they can do, but they're still a product of what environment they're going to be in, right? So the good thing is to understand is it is within your control, and it's not your physiology. I mean, for some people it may be, but for the most part, most of the people that we see, their physical gains can continue for years, even over the age of 40. What have more specific limitations is when you start getting to the higher levels, excuse me, and you start identifying truly what type of athlete you are. And of course, something like this that comes to mind would be someone like a Robbie McEwen versus a Carlos Sastre. I mean, Carlos Sastre is not going to go into a field sprint. He's just not that type of rider. And Robbie McEwen's always going to be at the back of the bunch when they're climbing the mountains, right? The thing that's important to understand for most masters athletes, or pretty much all the athletes in this room, is that you don't even think about that stuff. Don't even stereotype. There's so many gains that can be made aerobically in your fitness without worrying about, am I a climber, am I a sprinter? I mean, those types of things come out, but focus more on just your base fitness and getting stronger and stronger on the bike. This is huge. Successful competitors know the meaning of the word sacrifice and are always looking for new methods to improve. A couple things pop into my mind. First of all, sacrifice is different for everybody. The one that comes to mind for a younger athlete is, I have Tom here from Europe. Tom, he lived in England, knew he couldn't cycle there, at a young age, picked up, moved to Spain for 5 years. Total sacrifice of his life. That's at a very large, because he wanted to be on the pro tour. He could, if he stayed in England, it just wouldn't happen. So he sacrificed potential income, job, family obligations, things like that, to move to the south of Spain. Okay, so sacrifice is huge. That's like I said, that's a very one-sided example. But sacrifice has to be done at our level too. Maybe in different ways. Maybe you have to train every night after work at 5 o'clock or 5:30, and you can't go do something else with your colleagues or friends because you need to go train. That's sacrifice. The other thing is, successful competitors are always looking for new methods to improve. The big one that pops into my mind, his name's not that popular right now, is Tiger Woods. The guy was now he's not at the top of his game for obvious reasons, but even when he was winning, back in the early 2001, 2002, he made an announcement that he was changing his swing. I mean, the guy went and destroyed everyone at the U.S. Open at Pebble Beach, probably, 15 strokes or something like that. And then the next year he comes and he says, I'm changing my swing. And what was the reasoning? I want to get better. I mean, this is the guy, and he's doing it again. He's got a lot of time to do it now, but he's definitely changing the swing again, and could be one of the reasons why he's struggling, but we all know the reasons why he's struggling. When I look at this, similar to going into battle, being prepared, knowing your enemy. I mean, if you go into a war and you don't know your enemy, what happens? I don't care how strong you are, you're slaughtered, right? So why shouldn't bike racing and the people you race against, or anything that you're competing, triathlon, running, knowing your competition, knowing their tendencies, and know that you are going into battle. And Mike is, without a doubt, one of the guys I think about. He was going into battle every time. It was a war, you know? And you have to have that type of attitude, and you have to do that type of research and that type of thinking about when you're going into these things. Because if you don't go do it, I can guarantee someone else is doing it and will take your place. I think another thing that's interesting is to be able to be successful, I think, is specifically winning, realizing that a red carpet just doesn't roll out and the win just happens, like everything just falls into place. It's a battle, it's a fight all the time, and you have to fight to win. One person who pops in my mind is, I don't know how many of you guys know Harvey Nitz, who's a local coach, ex-Olympian, ex-7-Eleven guy who lives in Rockland. I mean, Harvey won so many races in his career, it was crazy. And I asked him once, how many of those were hard? Or how many were easy, how many were easy? And we're talking like hundreds of races. He could only list 2 that were easy, and he started laughing because something happened. In other words, he fought for everything. For a guy like him, I remember he would never go for preems and criterion, ever. He goes, I don't want to waste my energy, I want to win the race. His sole focus was on winning the race. And he knew that if he went for preems, it's wasted energy. What happens when you go for a preem? Well, you're obviously wasting yourself, and especially you get pissed off if you don't get it, right? And usually the break will go right after that, or can go right after that, and you're not ready for it. So you have to have your priorities, and you have to have your focus. True competitors find the desire and need to compete and win in their sport. The focus is the competition. In other words, it's all good about getting physically strong. That kind of stuff comes. But they're looking forward to Saturday and Sunday, and I just use that as an example in Northern California. They just can't wait to get into the bike race. It's all about the bike race. It's all about, how many guys have I known, and women, that are not physically that gifted, but once they get into the heat of battle, they're a completely different person. I'm not saying that everyone is built that way, but just by understanding it and knowing that that's the kind of focus you need to have to be successful is a step in the right direction. When evenly matched, great competitors usually beat great athletes. I'd go as far as saying, like, if you really want to win and you're the great athlete and you're in a side-by-side sprint, the competitor will probably beat you by an inch. The competitor just wants it more for whatever reason.
That's all they have to do is run.
That's all they have to do is run. Yeah, I'm saying they're struggling to get to that point. Yeah. To be successful, you have to understand the risk factor, both mentally and physically. There's always risk in this stuff. And what I mean by, so let's break that down into 2 different components, the mental side and the physical side. Okay, so there's obviously physical risk. Maybe there's a point in a bike race where you're going to have to make a move and it's dicey, or go through a hole that's only maybe this big, to get to that point. And it's risky from a physical standpoint, but you have to be willing to do that. And I can tell you, once you do it once or twice and practice it, it becomes a heck of a lot easier to do. You gain a lot more confidence doing it. Then there's the mental risk, and what I mean by that is, the mental risk is more, so many athletes are just scared to try something. They're just scared. They're scared to go out there, attack, and fail, so to speak. And what's really important is that you have to push your limits and I'll talk about it a little bit more later, but you have to push your limits and quote-unquote fail. And what I mean by fail is not being a failure. It's just maybe not win. I would rather see one of my athletes attack, be aggressive, and get caught with 10 meters to go than sitting there and do nothing. All the time. Being aggressive and doing that. Rather have that all the time, because what it does is it gives their mind the ability to see what it takes to win. If you're sitting in the pack, you never see that. If you try nothing, if you risk nothing, you don't see that. You have to push the limits to see what it feels like. And once you get there, oh, I made it, almost made it. I was caught a hot. I mean, I think of some of these tour stages. These guys are out there forever. And what are they, caught within 1K to go? It's like the pack just hunted them down at the right time. But at least those guys felt what it was like to almost get there versus sitting back and doing nothing. They risked it. They risked it mentally. Hopefully they just picked themselves up. Well, like maybe not try it again on the tour, but at some point they'll try it again. How about the stage of Fuse? Warner almost made it? What was that? He almost made it. It was so close. And he had a smile on his face when it happened, I think. Oh, did I just miss one? Oh. I just knew what to do. You hear that a lot. There's a lot of racers who are successful that they don't even think, they just do. They don't analyze that much, they just do and it happens. Well, that just comes with experience. And so obviously, where do you get that experience? From the mental risk or the risk that you made above. You just have to keep trying, and eventually it does become instinct. It takes time, different amounts of time for different people, but it does happen. Because obviously things are happening so quick in a bike race, it's like I said, there's no timeouts. Timeouts, I can talk to my team director and find out if I should go with this move. And it just doesn't happen. You got to decide right then and there whether you go or you stay, right? And doesn't it always seem like the guys who win, if you talk to them, they just say, oh, I just knew that was the right move. I just knew. Well, A, they're contributing to that move, and B, years of experience of trying and probably failing a lot more than they're successful. Okay, so how to become a better competitor? Okay, first thing that has to be understood is I think this is key, is physiology eventually will win. I don't care if you're the most brutal competitor, the best competitor, if you go into a level that you're not physiologically ready for, you put anyone into the Tour de France and they're just a Cat 4, I don't care how competitive they are, they're not going to do well. Physiology wins. But see, each level of competition is a battle, and that's the way that the whole system is set up, is what I tell my athletes, right? You sign up in USA Cycling, you start as a Cat 5, you get your requirements, you go up to Cat 4, and vice versa. So in theory, by being in the category you are in the pool to win, so to speak, because you've earned your way to be there, right? So you're competitive against your group. And what happens, of course, is you succeed, you go up to the next level, and it starts all over again. And it's harder, because you have more guys that are dedicated, more better athletes, and so on and so forth. And think about these guys that start at the lower levels. And you guys, I think of Mike. I've known him since was there Cat 5 then? There was Cat 5. When he started in Cat 5, and it didn't happen overnight, it took time, but he fought, he goes up to 4, he fought, he goes up to 3, eventually becomes a pro, races in Europe, and makes a whole career out of it. Tenacity, perseverance, if anyone understands what it takes to get to the top, going up through the levels, it's Mike. Okay? And it happens at our levels too. You have to, it's just the way, it's the nature of the sport. Unless you decide you're just going to stay at a certain spot, right? I'm just going to make it to 3s and then I'm going to stop, which is realistic, given the environment that you're in and the time you have to train and so on and so forth. But the point being, each level of the ladder is a new battle. To become a better competitor, I think you can actually start by just asking yourself why you're doing this and why you're lining up at the start line. It's an interesting question. There's no right or wrong answer to that. Do you enjoy competition? Do you enjoy getting beat? Were you successful in another area of life and you want to try this? And what literally turns you on about bike racing and what it is? Everyone has their own answer to that. Then again, there's no right or wrong answer, but I think it's something that you can start with, just asking yourself why you're there. You can't answer it for anybody else. Trust me, we've had those conversations a lot. Why does he show up? I have no idea why he shows up. But ask him. It's the it's the truth. You can only answer it for yourself, and it's actually a pretty psychological type of analysis of yourself that I think that needs to be addressed with every athlete. And I sit down with all my athletes and I just ask them, why are you doing this? And it's not a negative, why are you doing it? I just want to know, what is it about the bike racing? I mean, were you a kid and loved riding your bikes? Did you race in the streets? And this is just something that you like? Is it something that you don't get hurt like running, and so you ride a lot? Obviously, there's a lot more riders going into their old. If you go to a cycling club, there's very rarely running clubs that have a lot of masters in it, right? They've all switched to cycling because their bodies are just Rob can attribute to that. So it definitely offers us a lot, and I'm always interested in asking my athletes why they're doing it. I really believe the answers are good. I think it's really important when you line up at the start line to respect all your competitors. Everything's even at that point. All prejudice goes out the window, right? Everyone deserves to be there, and everyone deserves to win. They work hard. Why shouldn't they win, right? I mean, how many times do you line up and you're like, oh man, he or she is there, or oh gosh, he's here. I thought he wasn't going to be here today, or man, that guy drives me crazy, whatever. All that goes out the door. You have to respect your competition. You don't have to, the old saying, you don't have to like them, but you have to respect them. Simple, but think of it as just that, a bike race, okay? What can you do to cross the line first legally and focus on what you're trying to accomplish? It's actually a pretty novel concept, but everyone's there for a different reason. How many times do you hear, I'm just here to finish, or I didn't have a good week, or whatever, right? It's bike racing. If you weren't there to compete, then I'm just trying to get my point across here, there's centuries where you don't have to compete, right? There's group rides where you're really not competing. This is a bike race. You're paying money, you're lining up at the line, and the whole goal is for somebody to win, either you or one of your teammates. And so I think that's sometimes just missed, right? Become a student of the sport. I think it's important. Understand the sport, some history. I think it's important just to understand the sport a little bit more. By knowing the other great athletes, you can learn things from them. I like this one, talk to winners. Go up to the guy who won or the woman who won, just ask them how they did it. Trust me, they'll talk your ear off for 30 minutes about how they won and how they did it. They love to talk about that stuff. So of course I tell my athletes never to say anything. Seriously, they love to talk about it. Exactly what happened, what they did, ask them what they were thinking. It's a great person to learn from. First thing you do, as a good competitor, a sportsman, you go up and you congratulate them, shake their hands, tell them nice race, pull them aside and ask them how they did it. They'll tell you, and it's a good learning experience because only one person wins the race, right? My good friend sitting in the back, Rob Nichols, taught me this one back in the 1980s. It's the little things that make a difference. I'll never forget that. Everyone's doing the big things. That's a given. Training hard, doing this, working on that. It's the little things. Maybe it's going to see the nutritionist, Marlia. Maybe it's going to see Rob. Here is a physical therapist that works with biomechanical development. Maybe it's hiring a mental coach to help you get through that. Maybe you're more flexible and you want to work on that. It's the little things, that really help you get over the hump. In every race, there's a key moment for you or your team. Learn to identify it. At least learn to identify it and come back and say, I saw it, but nothing happened. If you can at least identify it, that's a start. There's a key moment. It could be a variety of things. Depends on the race. I mean, depends on the type of race, whether it's hilly, road race, longer part of a stage race, could be a crit. I mean, hey, crits, 99% of crits end in field sprints, for the most part. Playing the percentages, if you're setting up for that, there's going to be a key moment in the last few laps that you know you're going to need to take a risk and be in the right position, or know where you need to be and you need to get there. And there's going to be one opportunity for you to be in that position. And you just have to identify it. So just start by identifying the key moment in a bike race for you or your team. Aggressiveness, especially in the early season, failing to succeed, which is what I was talking about with the mental side, helps bridge the fitness gap to the being more competitive. You know, bike racing is an interesting sport. It goes back to the to the running that I was talking about. You have to, when you train for bike racing, you could literally say generally that you're training just for preparation for racing, because you have to race in bike racing, or do some kind of bike racing intensity, whether it be group rides or whatever. So being aggressive in the early season, attacking, doing things that you could never do in training by yourself is a great opportunity to do that. So what we try to do with our athletes at the beginning of the year is be a little bit more aggressive and not necessarily worry about the win, but just worry about bridging that gap from the training that you were doing to get the race legs that you need. Now, athletes who race a lot obviously will have the opportunity to do that early in the season. If you're going to race a little, you're going to have to substitute something going into those races, some anaerobic work, maybe some group training rides, maybe some motor pacing, something to help substitute for all the racing that you would normally not do, or you just don't do. But the pros, I mean, they're racing 80 races a year. I mean, they don't need to do high intensity to get ready for this stuff, right? They're using the races, and their season ended last October, and they're starting again in February to go on for this year. So aggressiveness early in the season. Plus, I think the other thing that's key about the aggressiveness from a physical side is it just gets you in the race. You know, it just gets you into the race. I mean, you want to just get into the race and just go and do something and attack and get into the mode. First thing that happens is your fears go away because you're being involved. I had a woman in here the other day that I tested, and she was doing her first crit. And all she could talk about was how nervous that first crit was. So what did I tell her to do? Attack. Just, first of all, if you're nervous about it and it's not your style, you know, you're probably not going to get the result anyways, or that's not your main goal. So just get involved with the race. Start attacking. Start doing things. And she did it, and it got her mind off of what she was trying to prevent happening, which was cornering at speed, being in a group, and it was the Folsom crit that was just last week. So it mentally gets you out of possibly the fear that you have of whatever, and gets you involved in the race. Really important. Now this is like so cliche, but it's got to be said. It's not the success that molds us; it's the setbacks. And the person I always think about is Abraham Lincoln. I mean, have you ever done like a search on his failures? It's just the most, he's, you know, by all accounts, he's the greatest president of the United States. And if you go do a search on his failures, the list is amazing. Defined failures like, you know, lost this election, lost this job, lost this, lost that. I mean, it's just amazing. But what do we remember him for, right? We only remember him for his greatness as being a president, right? Well, I can tell you one thing, in bike racing, like golf, you're going to lose a lot. It just doesn't happen that there's too many things going on. So you have to literally, it's a cliche, but you have to take those failures and mold them into success. I mean, I know you hear it all the time. That's why you hire a good coach. Because a good coach can help you do that. Bounce the idea and talk about that stuff. You have to pull the positive out and move on. This is one of my favorites too. Don't hang out or listen to negative writers. You ever hear it after a race, just walk away. Don't let them yell at you, don't whatever. They're probably yelling at you because they didn't win. If they won, they're not going to yell at you. They're going to thank you, right? How much negative talk do you hear? is crazy. Just walk away. You don't need it. It's positive that we're moving towards. Just discuss this issue with family, friends, or teammates, or your coach, obviously, and develop a good network around you. You know, I mean, these are just good discussions with your friends and your teammates about how we can become a better competitor, how we can succeed in this, what people are thinking, what are their fears, things like that. I mean, these are real things. It's no sense of hiding this stuff. Find your network and talk to them about it. If you have a fear, by all means, bring it up and talk about it. It's the only way to deal with it. I can tell you, most of us have them, right? And it's really important to talk about this stuff, about focusing on this being a better competitor, not just a better athlete. Okay, so there's a fine line between what I'm talking about and the tactics that are involved. Okay, obviously tactics and strategies are a big part of being successful in bike racing, right? And tactics are unbelievable in bike racing. They're changing all the time. Like I mentioned, it's very dynamic. And discussing tactics and strategies are so important to talk about with your team. So I'm going to ask Mike, so what's like the process for BMC before tour stage? Dell Evans has the yellow jersey. What do you guys talk about? I'd love to know, if you can tell us.
Well, I won't use that scenario. That's not a really good scenario, just for various reasons. But I will say this. You know, every director has his own way of doing things. That's kind of what you do when you become a director, especially if you're an ex-rider. You got to figure out your mode, your method. And as a rider, I had a couple of rules that I used to have for myself and my teams as a rider, and I tried to carry those with me as a director. So the first thing is something that's going to contradict a little bit what Bruce said, but it's in a different vein, and that is that when I go into a race, my teams always have a plan. Okay, we have a plan. We know exactly what we're going to do before we leave the place that we're meeting. So if we're meeting, we're talking, and don't get me wrong, this is not. I don't run my teams like a dictatorship. It's fully a democracy. Riders have input, and I ask everyone what they think, but generally, I already have the plan in my head. So before everyone leaves the room that we're in, we have a plan. And the first rule that I have in my teams is we have a plan, and we're going to race to the plan. And if we get beat, we got beat. Huh? We go up to the other person, the other team, whatever, congratulations, great job. But if in the middle of the race, all of a sudden I start hearing chatter on the radio, or when I was a rider, I start hearing riders come to me and say, well, I want to do this, and I want to do that, and I want to... No. We're not doing that. We have a plan. The plan is the plan. The plan doesn't change. I don't care. It can hail, it can rain, it can get crosswinds, we can go up, we can go down. It doesn't matter. We have a plan. The plan is a general plan. Then within the plan, that's where you have some variability that you can play out. But the first thing is you really have to have a plan. And so for me, if you have a plan and you stick to that plan, no matter what happens at the end of the day, you can say, I had my plan and I executed the best I could based on what was given to me, what I was able to give to the race, or whatever, what my team could give, what my team could take, and that's it. And so part of the role of a director is to be able to accept the responsibility. If the director is not for me, I'm not the upper management of my team. I have people I answer to. I have not sponsors. I have actual people, presidents, and bosses that I have to answer to. So if they come to me and say, well, why didn't we get anything out of this race? And if I can say, well, we had a plan, and this is what our plan was, and we went in, and so-and-so or such a rider wasn't able to perform, or we as a team didn't come together, well then, at that point, That's my problem. That's my problem for not being able to organize my riders well enough or give them enough information to perform. So if you take that to your own individual racing and you say, you go into the race or the training ride, either one, I think you should have a plan for both. If you go into those things and you have a plan and you try to do your best, and you come out of that situation and you're like, it didn't work out for whatever reason. Infinite number of reasons. But at least you can say, I had my plan and I did the best I could within my plan, and I'm happy with that. And this is what I've learned from using my plan and it not working, or using my plan and it working. Now I can move on to the next thing. So you have, there's a lot of levels of ownership there. There's ownership on the rider level, there's ownership on the management level. And trust me, Bruce will tell you, as a rider, I was always the first one to take ownership of my situation. If I went to a race and we didn't win that race, I didn't go and say, well, my teammate over here, I dropped him with 200 meters to go and he took 3 pedal strokes and blew. That's not what I do. That's not what you should do. The correct answer is, I got him to 200, but I should have got him to 100. So next time, I need to do better. And that's it. You take from that what you can, and you move on to the next thing. The one nice thing about cycling is there's not infinite opportunities, but there's a lot of opportunities. And you can't let, in cycling, whether it's training or it's racing, you can't let one situation just poison the whole well. It's one situation. Do your best to let it go, or embrace your success and move on. The one thing about this sport that Bruce said very early on is, and this is maybe the number one thing I tell guys, is this sport and athletics in general, because I come from my wife was an athlete in college, I'm an athlete, my father was an athlete, I'm surrounded by athletes all the time, almost every day, in every facet of my life. Athletics is not fair. It's never going to be fair. You can't make it fair. It's not going to get fair. Hold your breath. I don't care. It's not fair. Some guys win races, some guys don't. One of my best friends in the world won in 10 years, won over 350 races, I think we calculated. He's my best friend. I won in my career maybe 40 races, maybe. But the fact is that, and he would be the first to tell you, the reason that he won all of those races is because he had people he trusted, he did the details. All the things that we've covered here as the things that you should do is what he did. The details, the training, the teammates, the organization, the mental part, the physical part, all that. That's what he did. That's what made him so good. On top of everything else, he was just naturally gifted. And that is what it is. And so for him, you that person. For me, I embraced that person, and I didn't look down on it as a negative on my part. What I found very early in my career was I could find a lot of, because I knew I couldn't win that many races. Very early on, I realized that, and I don't know if it was because. I can sit up here and tell you that I can go to almost any bike race in the world, local, international, and I can, if I'm in the bike race, I can start the bike race and within 15 minutes, I can tell you what's going to happen. I don't know why. I can't. I can look at it, I can look at the people, I can look at the riders, I can look, and I can just tell you what's going to happen. Maybe not exact, but I can be pretty close. Okay, that was my gift. That was what I was given. So I did the best to use that. Physically, I could get world-renowned people up here to tell you that physically, I should have never been a professional. Not one day.
I wasn't going to say that. I was not going to say that. I wouldn't be that hard on yourself. But
but
you're still good, but he's the classic competitor of the athlete versus competitor.
If I got Max Testa here, who was my team doctor, who was a very good friend of mine, who I trust when it comes to cycling, maybe more than any person in the world, he would tell you that physically, I should never have made it out of the Cat 3s. That's just it. That's just a given. And he told me that. I mean, he told me that. That was a hard conversation to hear.
It's funny because he usually tells the people who don't make it that they could have been pros.
Right. But he told, so I didn't have the physical abilities to do that, and I knew it very early on. And so what I realized was I need to figure out something else. I need to figure out a different way. If I really want to do it, I got to figure out a different way. My way was to connect with a person and dedicate my life to that person, my cycling existence, and my personal life for close to a decade. And that was what I was going to do, and that's what I did. And so because of that, I had some success. At the same point, though, it gave me a very unique opportunity to sit back and watch somebody who was immensely gifted physically. Mentally, not so sure about. But don't ever tell him I told you that. But I could look at a person that would make mistakes, and even when he made the most horrific of mistakes, he would still win the bike race. And after the race, very often we were roommates. So we would go back to our hotel room, and I'd be like straight up, like, I have no idea how you won that. Like, you didn't deserve to win that. You need to give that money back. You literally stole that from 150 other guys. And he would laugh and say, yeah, I know. But because he was so physically gifted, he could bridge that gap between him getting, you can label it what you want, getting lazy, getting overconfident, whatever, and he could bridge that gap physically and he could still win. Okay, there's only a handful of people in the world that I know that can do that. Cadell Evans is one, for sure one. Lance is another one. There's other guys out there. But, I got to see this person operate on a daily basis and really, could see the mistakes that he would make that he had no business making, but because he was physically able, he could bridge it. I was not able to do that, so I had to go a different route. So I guess that was a really, really extended answer to say that in training and racing, you have to go in with a plan, and you formulate your plan, and you stick to your plan, and I mean really, like, you stick your feet in mud, and this is my plan. And you work it out with your coach or whoever it is, your confidant, whoever that person, your team, whatever. And you just say, this is my plan, and I'm going to stick to it. Long term, short term, you should always have a plan for everything. For today, for this week, for this month, for this year, for 5 years, for 10 years, however long you want to do this. And just do it, and try your best to do it. And at that point, either it works or it doesn't, and you move on, accepting whatever happens.
So two things that he said really popped into my mind, sort of summarizing a little bit, was one, the thing about bike racing is, if you look, it'd be interesting, if you go back and look at your programs for the last 2 years and you compare race days versus training days, I would assume that the training days outnumber the race days dramatically. So when asked early season or am I ready type of situation of should I go race my bike, absolutely, is my answer. Because you don't get that many opportunities to learn tactics and really race your bike. It's different than a group ride. Group ride, different varieties of people show up, different fitness levels, there's no real money being exchanged. You go to a bike race, you're paying your entry fee, everyone's got the same goal, you're lining up at the line with the goal is to win the bike race. So you try to get as many opportunities as you can, and again, like in Mike's world, in the professional world, they have a ton of opportunities to do that. And plus, to get to that point, they had to have a ton of opportunities. But we don't necessarily have as many as we want. We'd love to have more twilights around here, just more situations where you can put yourself in the last lap, in the last 2 laps, and practice, have a plan, as Mike would say, fail, succeed, whatever, but at least you're getting out there and you're practicing that type of thing. The other thing that popped in my mind while Mike was talking is he's a perfect example to be competitive and have a competitive nature. You don't have to think of yourself as winning every bike race. In Mike's case, he never said the name. Can we say the name?
Yeah, for those of you who know, one of my best friends was Gord Fraser, was a Canadian rider, and he very talented guy, very physically at every level. He was just immensely talented. A guy really who broke the mold in America for. He was a sprinter. But I saw that guy go up in the first group with some of the best climbers in the world, and he really broke the mold of what it was to be a sprinter. Very dangerous, a lethal competitor. I mean, lethal to a different style of competitor as compared to myself, which is probably why we got along so well, and we could compare notes and in the races and after and before and find common ground. But lethal when it came to like what I call, that the money shot. Like the money shot. That's it. This is it. That moment. In the bike race, when you know it's gonna happen, he was absolutely lethal. And for a period of time, not a month, not a year, for like 5 years, where he could not be beat. Literally. Unless he said, I'm not gonna win today. That was the only time in like a 5-year period that I remember him not winning. When he just would come to me and say, I don't feel good, this is not a day for me, I'm going to dedicate to somebody else, for whatever reason. And there were many times where a guy like that, guys like that, if you were one of those type of people, even at a local level, there was many times, I think what you get out of a team is this. This, for me, was always a key situation, or at least somebody that you trust. He could even be a coach, really. There were those moments in the bike race where he would come to me and he would say, hey, man, it ain't happening today. Like, he's like, I don't feel good. I want you to do your own race or whatever. And I'd be like, I'd just be like, hey, just whatever. Just don't worry about it. Go to the back or whatever, or don't. And just chill. Just don't worry about it now. We'll worry about it later. Let's just talk about it in a moment. Let's go 10 more K. We'll see how you feel. We get 10K down the road. Okay, what do you think? I'm not good. I'm not good today. I'm not going to go for it. I don't feel good. Okay, let's, whatever. Let's go 10 more K. Let's do it. You do that 5-6 times. I'd get him within 10K of the bike race, and I'd be like, all right, man, this is it. We're 10K to go. What do you think? He's like, I'm good. That was it. I mean, it literally went from, I want to quit, I want to get in the car, I want to stop, pull over, I want to get in the car, I'm done, I want to go home, whatever, to, in 10K later, like, I'm good, let's do it, let's go. Okay. There's a lot of times where you just have to, you play these mental games, you do it in training,
Always go through a bad section.
Yeah, I'm really hurting.
Yeah,
I'm really hurting. I'm going to go. When I get to this point, I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop the interval. I'm going to get to that telephone pole. I'm done. I'm going to get to the end of the road. I'm turning around. Whatever. I'm in the race. I'm going to go one more lap. I'm done. And you get to that point, and you're like, okay, I'll go one more. You got to play game. You got to. It's all part of the being the competitor part. Is you have to. Sometimes you gotta lie. Sometimes you just gotta lie, just flat out. Like I'm gonna quit when I get there. When you get there, you're like, well, I said I was gonna quit, but I'm not gonna quit. And I really think that you can find these ways to play games with yourself in training, in racing, in whatever. And you can get through it, and you get yourself to the finish, and you never know what's going to happen. Have I ever gone to a bike race and seen 40 guys fall down in front of me and I win the race? No, I've never seen that. But I've definitely seen situations where guys have been absolutely not possible that this person can win the race, and they just get to this point, and the dynamic changes. The weather changes, whatever. For me, I used to say, I don't like heat. I live in Sacramento. I used to live in Arizona. I don't like heat. If it's over 90 degrees and I'm racing my bike, I am suffering. I am the form of my life. I'm not going well. But for many of you that know, you go to races like Super Week or whatever. You start at 6 in the evening. It's 102 degrees. You race for an hour and a half, all of a sudden the sun goes down, temperature goes down, and I remember being in races and I'd be like, my head is going to explode and I don't feel good. And as soon as that temperature would drop below 90 degrees, my body would just be like, okay, we're good now. And that's, or whatever. Or if I could somehow cool myself down, get some relief, and the switch would just go, and I'd be okay. So, Bruce would tell you that I didn't like, the thing I don't like in the world is quitting bike races. I don't like it. I don't like to do it. I don't like to see guys do it. Because you never, ever know what's going to happen. The dynamic in cycling can change so quickly.
Your tactic may be just to survive for this section. And then, like Mike is saying...
But that's a tactic.
That's a tactic.
That's not mine.
That's right.
That's a tactic. Survival is a tactic.
And when you're bike racing, our races aren't super long, but when these guys are racing for 4 or 5 hours, do you think they feel good the whole time? No way. No way. They're going up and down all the time.
Yeah, and you really can't. You again, it goes back to having a plan. If you go to a race, if you go to a Century or a Gran Fondo or whatever, and you look and you're like, I don't know, you go to a Gran Fondo like a Levi's Gran Fondo, and you look at it, and the course profile looks very daunting, right? You're like, ooh man, yeah, that's a lot of climbing. That looks not easy. So you get there and you're on the climb and you don't feel well. Your plan is to finish. Let's say that's your plan. My plan is to finish in this time frame. You get on the climb, you're like, oh man, I don't feel good. And you're in your mind, okay, my plan now is to stop. That's my plan. No, your plan was to finish, so just survive. That's a tactic. Survive through this particular period. Get over the top, reevaluate. It happens in pro races all the time. They get to a point, they get to the top of a climb, they get through a bonus sprint, and they reevaluate. Sure, the plan is still the plan, but they had to get through a certain, from A to B, or from, in this case, from M to N. And once they get through that, then they can reevaluate based on the circumstances. But at the end of the day, the plan is still the same. The plan is still to finish, or to win, or to compete, or whatever it is.
It always is changing. I think the comforting thing is you can literally take away from this, hopefully a lot of things, but we all go through that. You're not the only one that goes through that kind of stuff.
No.
Top level of the sports go through it. Mike went through it. I went through it. Everybody goes through it. It goes through on a daily basis. It's a battle. So,
And every person will say, every person will be in a situation and they're like, oh my, I am dying. I'm going to die. I literally am going to explode into flames on this bike and expire. But you know what? If you're suffering, if you're hurting, you have to remind yourself, that so are every other person in the bike race or the ride or whatever. It's just it's a shade of gray. You're suffering, this person is suffering, but it might be a different level of suffering, but they are suffering. I guarantee you, it's just they're either more comfortable with their experiences, not with their physical being, but their experiences, or they're more confident, or they're dense. I don't know. I mean, it's something. There's something that is allowing them to battle through that and keep going as a competitor, and you just need to realize that if you're hurting, so is everyone else. And you just need to get through that period so that you can get to another period where you maybe can feel better. And you may have to do that 100 times or 1,000 times in an event. But if you keep at it and you keep working it, at the end of the day, for most intents and purposes, at some point you will come good.
and by nature of the sport, that in cycling, it's brutal. I mean, it's just brutal because you're under the control of what's going on out there. There's no timeouts, like we were talking about. You have to make do. You often see golfers talk about, I went through a bad stretch in hole 12, 13, and 14 before I got it back and finished strong and still won the tournament. Well, that's a little bit different than when your heart rate's 180. You're in the gutter at 30 miles an hour and you're just trying to make it around the next corner. I mean, seriously, it's an unforgiving sport. It's not easy. it's brutal, and that's why there's a lot of dropout rate in cycling. Is people start going up the ladder like, no way, it's just not worth it. I'm not cut to be that. So very, very.
I think the biggest thing that that people will fail to do, and this is really common in masters type racing. So the thing that masters, and I had this conversation today. So just a quick background. Within B&C, we have a huge power initiative, and what I mean by that is one of the main goals of our team is to collect power data from in our case, an SRM, and that for every single rider that we have, every single day that rider puts his leg over his bike. It could be for a 1 hour ride or a 6 hour tour stage. Okay, and we have this very, very complicated overlapping system where we're collecting data from riders. And I would venture to say that within our team, it is the singularly most important aspect of our program, is this data collection. And the data is used for a lot of different things. Most of it has to do with bike design. We are a factory team. We are sponsored by a bike company. That bike company is dedicated to making the best product they can, and part of that is the collection of data. There's also other aspects to that data that are important. It's part of our inter-squad doping program. In other words, if we have data for a guy extending over a year, 2 years, 5 years, you can easily tell if that rider is doing things that he shouldn't be doing and prevent that from happening. You know, there's a lot of reasons that we do this, but the collection of data is really important. And I think that masters riders in general, because they come to the sport late, I guess, I don't really know the answer, but they get tied up in the numbers. The numbers that the SRM or the Power Tap or whatever it is. And I'll tell you that because I started racing when we barely used heart rate monitors, and I went through the heart rate monitor phase, and then at the end of my career I got into the data phase. Because I went through all three, using nothing, using something, and then using the most advanced technology. For me, my personal experience with it was I got to a point in my career where I told this story today to one of my colleagues, I found data to be a game. And what I was doing was I was going out on my bike and I was trying to get a high score every day. Right? I mean, it was a game. It was a video game. And I was going out and I was trying to get high score every single day. And I'm telling you, that does not work. So there was a period, what we found, the guy who is another one of my very, very close friends who was my coach, a guy named Todd Harriet, we were very close. And what Todd and I figured out was, for me, it was really, really beneficial to take my power tap, to open a drawer, to insert said power tap in drawer and leave it for up to a month at a time. I would go, nothing, no heart rate, no data, no nothing. I would just go out and I would do my work. I would have like a heart rate monitor with a timer on it, but mainly the timer was for, or a cycling computer, so I knew how far, how long, But I would go out like sans power and just do my workouts. And what it would do for me is I would get back to a point where is it the most efficient training? Absolutely not. Was I getting the most out of my training? Probably not. But for me, what it did was it got me back to this place that I really felt comfortable with. Was if I'm in the middle of doing an interval, I would really feel what was happening. I could really feel it. Like I know right now, I may be above threshold, I may be below threshold, but I don't know exactly where I'm at, but I know I'm close. More importantly, I know that I can go at this level till the top of pilot, whatever. I know I can ride at this intensity till I get to the top. I know that when I get to this spot, I can go big ring and I can push this gear to this point. And because I grew up around here, I know every climb and I knew every, where I could do what and the whole thing. Cheating a little bit, but still, I would just go back to the most elemental thing and just like try to figure out in myself what was happening. For me, what it would help me do is when I went to the bike races, I was never a fan when I race. Still, when I race now, even if I do go out and do a Masters race now or whatever, I don't like to see numbers. The only number I like to see is max heart rate number. When I reach that number, I'm in trouble. That's all I need to know. Okay, I need to go down. I need to ratchet down. Everything else to me means, like, I don't like it when I'm doing the intensity. I never liked it to see numbers. And I have riders now. I'll never say who, but I have riders now. I'm in the car, I'm driving. Here comes so-and-so, and they want to talk to me. Okay, come back. Hey, my power tap doesn't work. Can the mechanic take a look at it? If I had my answer, I'd be like, give me your power tap, and I'd chuck the thing out the window, and I'd be like, listen, you're back here talking to me, and meanwhile, the bike race is going up the road, and your teammates are at the front, and you're back here having to talk with me about the numbers that you can't read, that at this particular moment don't mean shit. I'm sorry. Don't mean anything. So, the fact is that you have to, sometimes the numbers are great. They give you something to look at and to compare, and they really do work. I mean, I'm not going to lie. They work. I'm a big believer, but at times I'm more of a believer that you just go out and you've got to feel what is happening to yourself. And I will tell you, it will make you a better competitor because you will get in the bike race, and instead of doing this, you will do this, and you will do this, and you will look around. And that's the number one thing that I see masters not doing. I see them not look. They're not looking. They're not looking. They don't even know what to look for. First of all, but they're not looking. They're not looking.
Right.
They're
That's
not looking
absolutely
at
right.
what's happening. They're not looking at what's happening over here. They're not looking. And I admit I have an advantage because that was my life for 15 years. That was 20 if you count my amateur years. But that was all that I understood, or I let myself understand. Was looking, what was happening in a bike race. But you have to get to yourself off of looking at the dashboard and looking at what is happening around you. Again, we're not talking about when you're out on your training ride and you're doing your interval, your hill repeats. We're not talking about that. We're talking about competing in an event. You have to look at what is going on because Bruce is right. No matter how much you train, you eat right, sleep right, you sacrifice countless things, you will not win a bike race if you don't know what is going on around you all the time. And it's really hard because the kids, and I'm 41, the kids that come up now that are on my team, 19, I'm a 19-year-old on my team. And what I see is I just see this. I see looking at the dashboard and not looking at what's happening in the bike race, not talking to his teammates. And the teams that I were on, I will tell you that we talked too much. All we did was talk. But in a bike race, we were always talking. Always. And I know we were the only team doing it. I know. I mean, I could see with my eyes. We're always talking. If I'm not talking to Scott Moniger, I'm talking to Gord. If Gord's not talking to me, he's talking to Hank, or he's talking to Scott, or he's talking to Derek Bouchard Hall, or whatever. We were always talking all the time. And trust me, we didn't talk to our director because he was not all there. But we would talk to each other. So that you need to at times get off of this and get your eyes up and look at what's happening. And that's becoming, that's becoming a student of the sport. That's just realizing what is happening in that competition that you're doing.
You can look at it later, or you give it to your coach because the coach wants it. The coach needs to see that kind of stuff. And in fact, as one of the things that I talk about with my athletes, I'd say that when I have the power discussion with them, I would almost say that the advantage of power is better for the coach-athlete relationship than for the athlete themselves. Many champions are made on heart rate. you know?
I mean, I
It's
just don't.
It's just a tool, it's just.
I don't know
another tool.
I don't know what an SRM is going to tell you in a bike race that you don't already know. Honest to God, what is the power tap or whatever? What is the power meter going to tell you in a bike race that you didn't know 5 minutes ago? You're hurting. You're at your max. You're not going hard enough. You're not going fast enough. Your cadence isn't good enough. I mean, what is it going to tell you? Nothing. And the ideal is it's a tool. It's not. I don't know.
Not a performance predictor.
It's
a
not
tool.
it's a tool. It's a tool that you use in training to allow yourself to give yourself a base for which to base your feelings on. Okay, I feel like this is what the numbers say at this, they're consistently at that, then that's what it is. Okay, perfect. Now you know. But we're here in the race, I defy anyone to tell me that they went into a bike race and looked down at their power meter and they were like, oh wow, 500 watts. Oh, I'm breathing through my nose. No, that's not what it's telling you. It's telling you you're on the limit or whatever, So, the competitor part of it, I think is really important to differentiate it from the actual athlete part of it. It's a different animal. And you need to, as an individual, you need to figure out. I'm not saying what I did works for everybody. It doesn't. It probably only worked for me. But I think that those things that you can, like I said, what I see with people in our age group is that there's just a lot of tied up in the numbers. And I understand you read the books, and that's what everybody says. That's what everybody talks about. Oh, at this level, at this wattage, at this, and this, that. Granted, but
that in itself is also sort of it's a problem, but it's also in the sport of cycling because of the nature of the sport. By becoming a better competitor, you won't fall into those buckets. In other words, just because how many athletes I've said or seen come to me and they say, well, my 5-second number is this, that puts me at this. I'm like, well, what does that have to do with winning a bike race? You can still, that's the nature of sport. You can still win without being the fittest athlete. That's what's so great about it, right? Because tactics and strategies do that.
And there's a.
I had a question, actually. I digress just a little bit, but I heard you say the plan, right? So would you suggest, or are you suggesting even in masters racing on a local basis that if you designated a certain person to be the sprinter, that plan doesn't change? We're going to get this guy to 200 meters, 500 meters, whatever that is, that you can't deviate from the plan, you have to.
No, I'm not saying you can't deviate from the plan. You can operate outside of the plan, but what I'm saying is if you go into a bike race and you have, let's use just, again, these numbers mean nothing. It's just for ease of explanation. We go into a bike race, we have 10 guys on our team, right? We have one sprinter. The plan is to ride for that one person. Okay. So you have to know how many people are you going to dedicate to that. Okay, you have your sprinter, that's one. You have your lead-out guy, that's two. If he needs 2 lead-out guys, that's 3. Okay, 3 guys that we're dedicating to that. Everyone else is, they've got, you have another plan for everyone else, let's say. But the plan A is still a sprinter. Now, your job as a team is to manipulate everyone else to do your plan, right? I mean, isn't it, our job as a team is to manipulate everyone else in the bike race to our will. So I'm going to give away a lot of secrets here, but if you go into a bike race and you have a guy who's sprinting and you say, okay, everyone else is covering breakaways, everyone else is making sure that we're represented in the groups, that's fine, perfect, right? That's part of the plan. So let's say you put one guy in a breakaway of 4, right? In my mind, as a rider or as a director, now I've just strengthened my plan, right? Because now what I've done is I've manipulated this small group off the front of the race, and within that small group, I'm now going to manipulate the other 3 guys. So what you're going to do is you're going to say, this is an example, you're going to go to the other 3 guys, and Bruce will tell you, when I was racing, I did this a lot. Like, I'd be in the breakaway, and at some point I would say, okay, I'm not working anymore. I'm not contributing to the breakaway. And of course, the other 3 guys would come back to me and ask me what I'm doing, and I would just simply say that I'm not working anymore. And the idea now, I'm now manipulating those 3. They have to make a choice, right? So now I've gone in with, to use poker, I've gone in with some chips. My chips are that I've got a guy in the breakaway. My big cache of chips is still in the peloton. So now the other 3 guys have to make a decision. Either they're going to match my bet, or they're going to call me, right? Okay, so let's say they call. Okay, you're not working, we're not working. Fine, no problem. Let's all go back. Because my big money bet is still that my guy can be your guy to the line. That's my bet. So if you want to call my bet, no problem. I'm perfectly willing to play that card. Now, if you don't want to play that card, you now have a tough choice to make. Are you going to continue to ride to the finish line and let me take a free ride and possibly lose to me? Which is not a guarantee, even if I sit on the whole time. But you got to make a choice. And so the whole idea is that as a team, or even as an individual, you are trying to manipulate the situation to a situation that you want. Not that you can control, that's not the right word. You don't want to control it, you just want a situation where that you are comfortable with, or that you want. And then once you get to that point, okay, then you got to come through or not or whatever. But the plan was still the plan. We still have a sprinter that we believe in. We still want a field sprint. But if these other guys are willing to continue to work and take one of our guys up the road without doing any work, okay, we'll go with that plan and we'll see what happens. And I guarantee you, at the end of the day, if it didn't work out in your favor and you sat on the breakaway and went to the finish and didn't win, and you went to your guy and they said, well, what happened? Well, I sat on, or whatever, or I didn't contribute as much as I should have, and I still got beat. No, okay, no, they're not going to be pleased, but if you did what exactly you said you were going to do, then they can't really be angry. And if they're angry, then they don't get it. But the fact is that you still went with the plan, and the plan was still to go for the sprinter. You just, the dictate of the race gave you another option. You had played your cards properly, in other words, inserting someone into the breakaway, and now they called your bluff, and you either lost or you won, or whatever, or somewhere in between.
And the key, of course, is that everyone on the team knows this plan and they're following it. A lot of times in amateur races or masters racers, if someone gets into the break, they're going to go, oh, I'm going to try to win this for me. Which, whatever. It's, they work hard, they feel like they do it. But in Mike's case, he's thinking everything he's doing is focused on what the original plan was. That's right. So everyone's bought into the plan and everyone's bought into the team concept.
And at the same time, you have to realize, like, I have a rule that I have a rule that I never go to another rider, or in my case, like another director or anything, and I never tell them, or I never ask them what they were, like, what were you doing? Or why did you do that? Or they have their plan, and they're racing their plan, and I have my plan, and I'm racing my plan. And if their plan beats my plan, then that's it. If I don't like what they're doing, then I have to somehow figure out how to manipulate what they're doing so that I do like what they're doing. And that takes, you got to figure it out. I mean, it's a
chess game.
It's a chess game. It's a math problem. It is what it is. I mean, you can label it, but you have to figure out, using what you have, your bullets, or your however you want to label it, to manipulate the situation to where you want it to be. And this, I mean, this is not only in a team dynamic. I mean, this can be in an individual dynamic. You could be a marathoner or in a time trial, and you're trying to manipulate the situation that is more positive for you, and then go from there. And I don't think any really good bike racer would argue with going into a race and saying, you know, I'm trying to manipulate this person and they called my bluff and I lost. I mean, it happens every day.
And when I was talking about earlier about things are dynamic and they're always changing, I mean, this is what's changing. He's in the break, and he has to think about the situation that he's in at that particular point and what cards have been dealt, because someone had to go with the break from his team. So what am I going to do that I'm in there now that's going to help contribute to the original plan? So you always have to be dynamic in thinking that things are going to change, and how do I keep my plan going given where I'm at right now?
And I've been in situations where I've had other teams come to me, like if I was a rider in a breakaway and I said, I know, I remember, I've been in breakaways, and I've been in breakaways like for 1 minute, and I've gone to guys and I've said, I'm just letting you guys know I'm not taking one pull, not one. I'm just letting everybody, so we're clear, I'm letting you know I'm not pulling. And then, no. At that point it's like, okay, and then I've had guys continue to ride, and then I get to the end of the bike race, and I've won or whatever, and I've had these teams come to me and say, well, why did you sit on? No, that's not the question. The question is, why did your guy continue to pull me around for 150K when I immediately told him I wasn't going to work? You know, or if I tell that guy, listen, I'm not working, and he's trying to convince me, it's like, no. Why are you convinced? Why are you trying to convince me? Yeah, okay, some guys I guess you could convince. Not me. I mean, I have a higher power I need to answer to. So it's like, this is what I'm doing, and you've got to take it or leave it. And you shouting and yelling or getting upset at me is not going to change my point of view. So, you know, you got it's all a plan, and you just got to, you know,
So
stick with it.
in a situation like that, if you're one of the other riders, what do you suggest? Shut it down, go back and attack again, hope you get a better mix and break?
You got it. Well, it's going to be different for every situation. But yeah, I mean, that may be the answer. The answer may be, to shut it down and reshuffle. The answer may be, okay, and just go to the back and then just start attacking. I mean, you have to figure out for yourself, based on whatever situations you have and what your plan is individually, team-wise, whatever, what you want to do. But yeah, it's a tough situation. I'm not going to lie to you. You got to look at it, and there may not be a crystal clear answer. There may not be an answer at that particular moment, but a moment may come later where the answer presents itself. Maybe there's a crosswind section. Maybe there's a climb. Maybe there's a really hairy descent, and you know this guy can't descend. I've been in that situation. Like, okay, fine. Go ahead and sit back there. And you come over the top of some climb, and it's like, all right, I'm attacking down the descent. And we'll see what happens. And you get to the descent, and guy's nowhere. Perfect. You know, or whatever. Or you come around a corner, you know that it's like, okay, well, we're going to make a left-hand turn here. There's going to be a crosswind. Well, I'm pretty confident that I can ride on a ½ inch of pavement for 10K. So if you can get draft off a ½ inch, no problem. But that's all you're getting. So, I mean, you have to figure out what the situation is, the course, the riders in the situation, what is best for you. And I'm honest to God, one of the hardest things to do in the world is to say, okay, we got to go back. Because you've dedicated energy to this breakaway, you've dedicated mental energy, physical energy, and it's not what you want. It's not what you want. You're like, I want this to work. Yeah, understandably. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. But you may have to make the tough, it's the saying in life. The hardest things sometimes are the best things. Sometimes it is best to just say, all right, okay, we'll go back. And we'll just reshuffle and just try to play something else.
You talked about your friend who's just a physically gifted athlete. I'm hearing that it sounds like you have to kind of be gifted mentally and possibly emotionally too. As you know, like some riders that might have depression or whatever. How do you train for that? You know what I mean? Maybe I could word the question differently, but that just popped in my head.
How do you train for like the mental?
The mental, emotional things going on.
Well, if my wife was here right now,
I should have to answer it.
she would have some things to say about that. I think that the emotional part of being an athlete is much more difficult than the physical part, because you really are you're fighting it. You want it. It's not happening. Or you want to feel good on that day. You spent all this energy and time and money and whatever to make an event happen for yourself, and it's not happening. And you can just feel yourself like melting down.
So do you become your own psychologist? Do you have mental therapists on the team?
I think you have to, let me put it this way, I think you have to find someone or a group of someone's that you can express yourself to. A lot of times, it's a coach. For me, I was very fortunate. I had a lot of outlets. I had my wife, I had my coach, who, my buddy Todd. I had my teammates a lot of times, and there was times where, you would go back, and the disappointment was, it was like, you could feel it, right? I mean, it was so thick, it was like, you could feel it. And you just have to, in my mind, you just have to talk, you have to just express and be honest with it, like anything in life.
What if it's over 90 degrees?
Yeah, I mean, you get home and you tell your wife, and your wife, your girlfriend, or whatever it is, your partner, and they say, "Oh, how did it go today?" And you're like, "Oh man, it was a mess. I was a mess today. I was an absolute mess today. I couldn't get out of my own way. I was stuck to the road. I couldn't find the breakaway. I tried 100 times. I couldn't find it. And then the one I didn't cover was the one that worked. We've all been there, and you just got it's just like, oh man, it's just depressing, and you just got to say, somehow you have to find a coping mechanism and just move forward. But it's hard sometimes. If you get in a cycle where it's not going well, I think every pro cyclist has had those periods in time where you just don't feel right. There's no answer in the world. I've seen guys retire, like literally stop racing because they went for a month or 2 months or 6 months where they just didn't feel right. And they're telling people, I don't feel right, I don't feel good, I just don't feel good. And then, just get over it, just try harder, just, go to the doctor, it's really a challenge, and there's no answer.
And I think that one of the keys, you have to have a team around you. You're not an isolated individual. And everyone's, like Mike says, everyone's outlet is different. It might be a sports psychologist, might be a teammate, might be your wife or girlfriend. I mean, it just may be someone who understands what you're going through, that went through just as much, might be your coach. But the point is, it happens to everybody, and it has to be dealt with, right? And I think it has to be dealt with a lot, and that does not have to be like, wait till it goes bad. All things have to be expressed, when you come home, you either did well or you didn't do well, or you're going through a time. I think about when Mike talks about not feeling good, I mean, we all get there. It's crazy. I think about these guys like baseball players that go through these slumps, and their batting average drop. What do? I mean, can you imagine? They don't change anything. They try to go through the same routine. Everyone's telling them they're going to come out of it. Something triggers it and they come out of it, right? But they just are persistent, they try not to give up, and they keep moving forward. The bottom line is, it happens to everybody, and it's like Mike's saying, emotionally it's torture.
To be, use an analogy, in basketball, if you have a shooting guard, he's a shooter, like Ray Allen, perfect example, and the guy's in a slump, 1 for 42 or whatever, I guarantee you, his coach, if he's worth his salt, will tell him, keep shooting. Just keep shooting. Don't think about it. Don't hesitate. Just keep shooting. So if you ride and you just don't feel well, sure, there might be some health issues you need to address. Absolutely. You may need to go get a blood test or get checked out by a doctor. You may have to have a physiological test and make sure you're all there. Whatever. But if you have exhausted all of those, and even while you're exhausting those, you just got to keep training and keep riding and you can't, you don't just give up. I'm done with it, or whatever. I mean, I see it all the time. You know, you see riders come and go, you know, all the time. A million guys over the years I've seen who had way more talent than me that just couldn't make it because they couldn't get out, they were in a slump, or they couldn't win a race, or whatever. You know, you just got to keep battling. You know, easier said than done, but that's what you have to do. You know, keep training, keep riding.
Continue. Getting towards the last slide. We don't have this many opportunities to, you know, football teams, basketball teams, they go into their little film rooms and they watch things. Well, there's a ton of DVDs available these days that you can go online and buy them and view how people win races. They're films just like anything else. If you get some of the one-day races like the classics, they're long. You know, they're over 2 hours long. You know, the filming of the last part of the race is 2 hours or sometimes longer. You can learn a lot about the tactics by watching those things. A lot of the tours or the grand tours seem to summarize a lot, except that they show all the field sprints. And 9 times out of 10, they'll show from the helicopter. You know who's going to win. You can watch what he does, and you can watch his team. So there's a lot of things out there, a lot of tools that you can use to help become better tactically. We discussed this over and over again. Talk with teammates before, during, and after. Like Mike was saying, his team talked the most. I personally think that, like we were talking about, a plan is important. You have to look at it during the race. I think the best time, for the most part, is after the race. Your team gets together as soon as possible while things are fresh, and you discuss what happens. Especially in masters racing, or when we all have lives and we have to leave and go home. Trying to do it over the internet in the next week or so just doesn't quite cut it. Maybe just spend 15 or 20 minutes, go for a warm down together, just sit around, talk about what everyone sort of take stock while everything's fresh and the emotions are there and so on and so forth.
Bruce?
Yeah.
I had a question about that.
Yeah.
Talking with your teammates before, the during part is what I'm curious about. Now, I'm a beginner racer, Cat 4. A lot of the races, I'm listening to some of the women talk, but I'm like, it's not very secretive. I mean, I know what you're going to do. Do you care? Are you loud? Are you around are
Well,
you
I think-
exposing your...
Yeah, I mean, to a certain degree, yeah, if you're talking about it openly.
Well,
but
yeah.
a lot of times it's just, not everybody knows what the context is. And quite frankly, not everybody, I think people care less about what you're talking about than you might think. If you hear somebody go, okay, hey, I want you to go to the front and whatever, and attack or do this, okay, yeah, I mean, that's an important piece of knowledge, and you should definitely take it and use it against them, but at the same time, I mean, maybe there's nothing you can do about it. Maybe it's not in your plan to go up there and attack or to cover an attack, or you think that attacking at that particular moment isn't really prudent. Sure. I mean, I think that communicating in a bike race, I got a couple rules of thumb on my team. Number one, if you're not early, you're late. Number two, there is no amount of communication that is too much. If I have a rider, it goes for everybody who ever does a race with me, staff, riders, whatever. If media guys, I'm like, if you have a question and you're not 100% clear on the answer, then all you have to do is ask. We have tools, phones, radios. That's what you do. You talk. There is not enough communication. So I think communicating, you just can't do enough. And whatever somebody hears or knows, I mean, that's really, it really makes not as big of a difference as I think that you think. I think it's just, if you get in this habit of communicating, again, at some point, once you do it enough, then you can actually start to communicate in ways that people won't understand. You know what I mean? I mean, if you're, I have guys I was teammates with for a decade. It got to a point where I didn't even need to say anything. I just go back there and look, and they'd be like, yep, okay, that's it, right? I mean, that's because they know what I'm going to ask, and I know what the answer is. So I think communication, you just can't do enough of it. And I don't think amongst, again, as an amateur rider or aspiring young professional or whatever, I mean, whatever level, I think people in cycling, people think of it as a real individualistic sport. I do this for me, I ride for me. I ride because I want to ride or whatever, I ride, and I think they get too much into this, like, it's about me. Cycling, from the very earliest history of sport, is a very social thing. People go out, they do it together. Men, women, older, younger. It's a very communal activity. Just because you're doing a bike race doesn't mean that ends. I'm sure if you talk to a lot of guys who raced with over the years, I used to be the most chattiest guy. I was talking to everybody. I'm riding up and down the field. I'm talking to everybody. Guys on my team, not on my team. A lot of reasons why I was doing that? Because guys would tell me stuff. They wouldn't have to tell me what they were going to do that day, but all they had to do is tell me a couple of things. Oh yeah, Brent last week was like, he wasn't feeling really good, and blah, blah, blah. And I look up the road, I'm like, wow, Brent's in the breakaway. I'm on the radio. Yeah, Brent wasn't feeling good last week, no worries. But that had a lot to do with that. You guys never figured it out, but I'd go around the field, I'd talk to everybody.
Well, if they're talking to you, they're not talking to their own team.
Exactly. Or they're not paying attention to the bike race. And that's one thing that I could do. I could have a conversation with a guy in the field, and at the same time, I would always have my ear. First of all, I had radio, so it was a little bit easier. But I'd always have my eye on what was going in the bike race. I was never having a conversation with somebody, and I wasn't at the same time paying attention to what was going on in the bike race. And there was many times in a conversation where I'm talking to a guy, and in mid-sentence, my head would snap around and be like, I gotta go. And that's it. Because business is business, and that's what we're doing out here. But I think communication in a bike race can lead you to a lot of things.
I think one goal, which is always good, is to set the goal to put yourself into position to win, not necessary to win. In other words, where do we, for example, if Mike is talking about leading his sprinter out, I can guarantee they know exactly where they need to be at that crucial point to put themselves into position to win, right? And so, in other words, a lot of people just go, well, I want to win this race. Well, how are you going to win this race? What is your plan and where you need to be? So you have to think through the whole process. Really, really important. Remain calm and focused and breathe. People get so uptight. And if they're getting uptight, let them get uptight. You just remain calm, focused, and breathe. And the reason I say breathe is because it's the one thing that you can focus on that actually is beneficial for you versus when you're suffering, thinking about some beach in Tahiti or something like that. You're not there. You're in the bike race, So breathe. Just relax and breathe. I always like to suggest you break the bike race into different segments, and one of the ones that I always use as an example was Nevada City. Nevada City always broke it into thirds. Mike can contest to this. The first 10 laps were brutal. And you would just focus on those first 10 laps, or how many laps it would be, staying out of trouble, staying in the front, letting things settle down, everyone jostling for position. And I literally could tell when that would jump over to basically chapter 2, which is the second part of the bike race, which a lot happens in that. And then I would always know when it's going into section 3, which is basically the finish, and what I need to do to try to win or help my teammate win. It's what we were talking about before. You always have to break this up into segments and maybe just make it through this one segment to get to the next segment, right? Versus thinking of it as a whole, thinking of it as a sum of the parts. And I think a marathon running, that's something like that is primo. You know the course. You can break it up literally into sections. Maybe the first 15 miles are flat, then you hit a 3-mile section of rolling hills, and then you have the last 6 miles or whatever, which are crucial. But you can literally break it up to those points. Once you've made it through one, you can go to the other. And it's up to each athlete to decide what they want to break up, and how much they need to break up. Always be, he just said it, always be thinking and analyzing what's going on during the race. You know, I remember Greg LeMond used to say 6-hour races seemed like they were 30 minutes. Because the guy was so into it. He never was relaxing. He was always thinking what's going on. Anything could happen at any time. You go to the middle of the pack, the winning break may go. You have to be attentive 100% of the time. That takes a lot of effort, a lot of mental effort, a lot of focus. Have a flexible plan. Well, we sort of talked about that. Oops, behind. I think another thing is, and this doesn't apply to all athletes, but I think if you can go in there and you're trying to go through this journey, so to speak, of being a better competitor, one of the first things that you can do is just go in with a goal of making a difference in the race, a positive difference in the race. In other words, maybe you just helped your team chase down the break because they didn't want it out there. You've done your job, you can sit up, you can do whatever you need to do, but at least you contributed. It all goes back to what I was talking about in the sense of just getting involved. Don't let the dynamics of the race, the mass of the race sort of control you. Try to take it by the horns and do something. It can be the littlest thing to help your team. It can be the littlest thing just to help you. You just have a goal of maybe making it to this point, whatever it may be. Or I really know that this race is going to end in a field sprint, and I know with 2 laps to go, I need to be in this spot. And you just get there, step one. Maybe you don't win, but at least you got to that point. Make a difference in a race. At least walk away and say, not necessarily to anyone else, but to yourself, that I did something. I did something positive that I can take with me and move on to the next one. And it can be anything. Because anyone's successes are maybe not someone else's successes. They're your own successes. You define it with possibly your coach and your teammates, that this is what I'm trying to do and make a difference. Really important. And finally, I just have a little graphic of when you put it all together, you have those guys. Thank you very much. If you want to stick around and ask Mike any questions or talk to him, whatever, it's great. 2 weeks, Marlia's back with on-bike or during event nutrition, which of course will be entertaining as always.